Nobody warned Rex about Lily. Nobody warned Lily about Rex either, but that was perfectly fine, because Lily Harmon, aged 3 years and 4 months, did not believe in warnings. She never had. From the moment she had learned to walk, she had approached the world the way certain people approach a swimming pool, not tiptoeing in from the shallow end, testing the temperature inch by cautious inch, but running full speed toward the deep end with both arms out and absolutely no hesitation whatsoever. It was equal parts terrifying and magnificent, depending on whether you were watching her or responsible for her. Her mother was responsible for her. Claire Harmon had learned over 3 years of parenting Lily that the phrase "stay close" was more of a suggestion than a command, that "don't touch" that was practically an invitation, and that the best she could do in any public situation was stay within grabbing distance and hope for the best. On most days, this system worked reasonably well. On this particular Tuesday morning in the Maplewood County Courthouse, it was about to fail completely and change everything. The courthouse sat in the center of Maplewood, Ohio, the way old government buildings always do, heavy and permanent and slightly intimidating, as if the architects had specifically intended for it to make people feel small. It had been built in 1923, and the intervening century had done nothing to soften its edges. Its stone facade was gray and imposing. Its steps were wide and worn smooth by 100 years of people climbing them with their problems tucked under their arms. Its interior smelled the way all old courthouses smell, like wood polish and dust, and the accumulated weight of too many difficult conversations held under fluorescent lighting. Claire had been climbing those steps for 14 months. Not every day, but often enough that the security guard at the front entrance now recognized her and waved her through with a look that was half sympathy and half professional neutrality. 14 months of hearings and continuances and document requests and attorney consultations that ate through her savings like fire through paper. 14 months of fighting to keep her daughter, which should never have been something she needed to fight for, but grief makes people do things that calm, whole versions of themselves would never consider. She pushed through the heavy oak doors that Tuesday morning with Lily on her hip and her legal folder pressed against her chest like a shield. She had been up since 4:30. She had made Lily's breakfast, braided Lily's hair, ironed the yellow dress with the daisies along the hem because it was Lily's favorite, and Claire wanted her daughter to feel like herself today, even inside this building that felt like the opposite of home. She had triple-checked the folder. She had called her attorney twice. She had stood in the bathroom mirror for 3 minutes telling herself she was going to be okay, repeating it until it started to feel less like a lie. She set Lily down in the lobby, took her hand firmly, and walked toward the courtroom. Lily walked beside her mother through the marble corridor with the alert, interested energy of a child who has never been to a place before and finds everything about it fascinating. She looked at the tall ceilings and the way her shoes made sounds on the stone floor. She looked at the portraits of stern-faced judges hanging along the walls and decided privately that they all needed to smile more. She looked at a water fountain and immediately wanted to use it, then was redirected with a whispered, "Not right now," that she accepted under protest. She was wearing her yellow dress, the one with the white daisies stitched along the hem that she had chosen herself from her dresser drawer that morning with great deliberation. She had Mr. Flops tucked firmly under her left arm. Mr. Flops was a stuffed rabbit of indeterminate age, originally white but now a soft, well-loved gray, with one ear slightly longer than the other from years of being held. Lily had slept with Mr. Flops every night of her remembered life. He went everywhere she went. He was her most trusted advisor. They entered the courtroom, and Lily's eyes moved immediately and instinctively through the space the way her father's eyes used to move through every room he entered, cataloging, assessing, settling. She noted the rows of wooden benches. She noted the tall windows with their thick glass that made the morning light look slightly green. She noted the big desk at the front where a lady in a black robe was sitting and shuffling papers and looking very serious. She noted the men and women in suits who were talking in low, important-sounding voices and not paying any attention to her whatsoever. And then she noted the dog. He was sitting near the back wall, very still, very large and very brown. He had tall ears and a broad chest and amber eyes that were already moving in her direction by the time her eyes found his. He sat with the kind of posture that said he was paying attention to everything in the room at once, which Lily found extremely impressive. He had a badge on his vest, a real badge, like the ones her father had shown her in pictures. Lily stopped walking. Her mother, who had been scanning the room for their attorney, took 2 more steps before she realized the hand in hers had gone light. She looked down. Empty. She looked up. Lily was already 3 feet away and moving. Lily, Claire breathed. But something made her pause. Maybe it was the quality of stillness that had settled over the room, a collective, instinctive silence, the kind that falls when something is happening that everyone present senses they should not interrupt. Every head in the courtroom had turned. Every conversation had stopped. Something was shifting in the air, and every adult in that room, even the most cynical, even the most exhausted, felt it. Lily walked across the marble floor with the easy, unhurried confidence of a child who has never learned to be afraid of the things that frighten adults. She did not hesitate. She did not look back at her mother for reassurance. She walked with Mr. Flops under her arm and her chin slightly lifted, her small daisy, hemmed dress swishing against her knees, as if she had known about this dog her entire life and had simply been waiting for the moment to finally introduce herself. Which, in a way that Claire would only fully understand later, was exactly true. She stopped 3 feet from Rex. She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them, just for a moment, something passed that had no name in any language adults use, something that existed in the older, quieter vocabulary that children and animals still share, before the world teaches them to stop speaking it. Lily tilted her head, took a breath, and asked the question her father had told her to always ask, the question he had whispered to her in the soft, certain voice she kept stored in the warmest part of herself, the voice she could still hear even though she could no longer remember exactly what his face looked like when he smiled. "Are you a good boy?" The courtroom held its breath. And the most decorated K-9 officer in Maplewood County, a dog who had never broken protocol without a direct command in 4 years of active service, heard a 3-year-old girl ask him the only question that had ever mattered, and decided, with complete and unhurried certainty, to answer her. There is a particular kind of respect that working dogs earn, not the soft, affectionate kind that people give to dogs who sit in laps and wear sweaters, but something harder and quieter and more serious. The kind of respect you give to someone who has proven themselves in situations that tested everything they had. The kind that doesn't come with baby talk or treat rewards or enthusiastic petting from strangers. The kind that comes from watching something perform under pressure and thinking, without any sentimentality at all, that is exceptional. Rex had that kind of respect in Maplewood. He had earned every ounce of it. He had come to the department 6 years ago as a 14-month-old Belgian Malinois from a breeding and training program in Pennsylvania that supplied working dogs to law enforcement agencies across the northeastern United States. His paperwork had arrived before he did, a thick folder of assessments, training records, and evaluations that used words like exceptional drive, superior olfactory capability, and highly focused temperament. The trainer who had worked with him during his initial program had written a single handwritten note at the bottom of the final evaluation page, outside the official formatting, which read simply, "This one is different. Pay attention to him." Officer Daniel Prout had been the one to drive down to pick him up. He had not been the department's first choice for a K-9 handler. That had been a senior officer named Kowalski who had requested the assignment for years. But Kowalski had thrown out his back 2 weeks before Rex's arrival, and Prout, who had expressed mild interest in the program during a departmental meeting 8 months prior, found himself handed the assignment on a Thursday afternoon with a set of car keys and an address in Pennsylvania. He had driven 4 hours south, expecting to come home with a dog. He had come home with a partner. The moment Prout stepped into the training facility's introduction room and Rex was brought in, not led, but brought in, walking with a self-possessed confidence that made the word led feel completely inaccurate, something happened that Prout had told the story of many times and still struggled to fully explain. Rex had walked directly to him, sat down at his feet and looked up at him with those amber eyes. Not excitedly, not submissively, directly, evaluatively. As if Rex was the one conducting the assessment, and had just made a preliminary decision in Prout's favor. "He chose you," the trainer said from the doorway, in a tone that suggested this was noteworthy. Pruitt had looked down at Rex. Rex had continued looking up at him. "Is that normal?" Pruitt asked. "No," the trainer said. They had been together every working day since. In 4 years of active partnership, Rex had accumulated a record that the department's public affairs officer liked to describe as remarkable in press releases, but which Pruitt privately thought of as simply the natural result of what Rex was. Which was, without exaggeration, the most capable working animal he had ever encountered or read about or heard described by anyone who worked in the field. The numbers alone were impressive. 37 successful drug detections, 14 suspect apprehensions, none of which had resulted in serious injury to any party, because Rex had a precision in his work that bordered on surgical. He applied exactly as much force as the situation required, and not 1 pound more, a calibration that many human officers spent entire careers trying to achieve. 8 search and rescue operations, 6 of which had resulted in the location of living subjects in time to matter. But the numbers didn't capture the texture of working with Rex. The numbers didn't tell you what it was like to watch him work a scent trail. The focused, almost meditative quality of his concentration, the way his body became a single instrument oriented entirely toward a single purpose. They didn't tell you about the night he had found a 7-year-old boy who had wandered into a wooded area behind a subdivision in January and had been missing for 6 hours, leading Pruitt directly to him through half a mile of dark forest with the unhurried certainty of someone following a well-lit path. They didn't tell you about the morning Rex had alerted on a vehicle during a routine traffic stop, an alert so subtle, a single sit, a slight shift of weight, that a less experienced handler might have missed it, but Pruitt had learned Rex's language by then and called it correctly, and the subsequent search had yielded a find significant enough to make the evening news in 3 counties. What the numbers also didn't tell you was what Rex was like off-duty, because off-duty, Rex was a different revelation entirely. He played fetch with an enthusiasm that seemed almost inconsistent with his professional dignity. He had strong opinions about which spots on his back were worth scratching, and would position himself against Pruitt's hand with the focused precision of a contractor overseeing a renovation. He slept at the foot of Pruitt's bed every night and occasionally, when he thought no one was watching, rested his head on Pruitt's feet while Pruitt worked at his desk in the evenings. A gesture so quietly affectionate that Pruitt had never mentioned it to any of his colleagues, feeling obscurely that it was private, something that belonged only to the 2 of them. Pruitt's wife, Corinne, adored Rex with a completeness she expressed by buying him a dog bed every 6 months that Rex never used because he preferred the floor, and by referring to him in conversation as the other man in my marriage, which Pruitt found only slightly funny and Rex found irrelevant. Their 8-year-old son, Marcus, had grown up with Rex as a fixture of his home life and regarded him with the casual, total confidence of a child who has never known a world without that specific dog in it. Marcus had once told a classmate, with complete seriousness, that Rex could find anything anywhere and also knew when you were sad and would sit on your feet until you felt better, both of which were entirely accurate. Rex was, in short, precisely the kind of dog that makes people who don't consider themselves dog people reconsider their position entirely. The Courthouse Comfort Program had been proposed by the department's community liaison officer 18 months prior and had taken 8 months to navigate the approval process. The idea was straightforward. The research supporting animal-assisted intervention in high-stress environments was substantial, and family court settings, with their particular combination of emotional intensity and institutional coldness, seemed like an obvious candidate. Rex had been selected for the program not just because of his credentials, but because of something more specific that Pruitt had noted during his years of working with him. Rex knew when people were suffering, not in a vague, general sense, but specifically and accurately, in a way that seemed to operate beneath any training or deliberate behavior. In situations where Pruitt couldn't see distress, Rex would orient toward it. In rooms where tension was hidden behind composed expressions, Rex would find the composed person and sit beside them with a quiet attentiveness that seemed to say, without words, I know. I'm here. Prude had watched this happen enough times that he had stopped being surprised by it. He had started calling it Rex's other job, the one no one had trained him for, but which he performed with the same unfailing precision he brought to everything else. So when Rex heard Lily's footsteps crossing the courtroom floor, light, fast, completely unafraid, and turned his large head toward the sound, and saw a tiny girl in a yellow dress walking directly at him with a stuffed rabbit under her arm and not a single atom of hesitation in her small body, something moved in those amber eyes that Prude, watching, recognized immediately. Recognition, not of the girl, he had never seen her before, but recognition of something in her, something Rex's nose was already reading before she came within 20 feet of him, something that matched a frequency Rex had been tuned to his entire life. She was carrying grief. She was carrying love. She was carrying the voice of someone who was gone but had prepared her, had sent her in a way across the floor of this cold building toward this exact dog on this exact morning, armed with the right question and the absolute certainty that it would be answered. Rex knew all of this before Lily said a single word. He was already deciding what to do about it. There are moments in life that announce themselves before they arrive. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a change in pressure, a collective intake of breath, a sudden and inexplicable stillness that falls over a room the way snow falls over a landscape, transforming everything familiar into something quieter and more significant. People who have experienced these moments often struggle to describe them afterward. They say things like the air changed, or everything slowed down, or I don't know how to explain it, but everyone felt it. Scientists have explanations for some of this: mirror neurons, collective emotional contagion, the subtle biological ripple that moves through a group of people when something significant is happening that none of them can yet name. But in the Maplewood County Courthouse on that Tuesday morning, nobody was thinking about science. They were thinking about a little girl in a yellow dress who had just walked across a marble floor with a stuffed rabbit under her arm and stopped 3 feet in front of a decorated police dog, and the way the room had simply, completely, and unanimously decided to hold its breath and wait. Officer Prude had moved the moment he saw Lily break away from her mother. Not running would have startled Rex and created exactly the kind of scene nobody wanted in a courthouse, but moving with the quick, purposeful stride of someone who has a specific task to accomplish in the next 4 seconds. His hand was already lifting toward the gesture that Rex knew meant stay focused, incoming contact, maintain position. He was 3 steps away when Judge Owens raised her hand. It was a small movement, a slight elevation of the left palm, fingers together, the universal gesture for stop, delivered with the particular authority of a woman who had been communicating her intentions to crowded rooms for 22 years and had long since mastered the art of saying everything with almost nothing. Prude stopped. Not because he was required to obey a judge's hand signals. Technically he wasn't, but because something in that gesture contained a quality he recognized from his years of working alongside Rex. The quality of someone who knew, instinctively and accurately, that what was unfolding should not be interrupted. Prude stayed where he was, and watched. Lily stood before Rex with the solemn, concentrated attention of a child performing an important ceremony. She was not afraid. This was the thing that struck every person in the room who would later try to articulate what made the moment so affecting, not just that she approached, but how she approached. Without hesitation, yes, but also without recklessness. With a kind of informed confidence, as if she was not simply a toddler who hadn't yet learned to be frightened of large dogs, but a small person who had been given specific and reliable information about this specific type of dog, and trusted that information completely. She studied Rex the way she studied things that interested her, with her whole face, her chin slightly lifted, her brown eyes moving carefully over everything she could see. She looked at his vest with its patches and its badge. She looked at his ears, which were angled forward in that particular way that meant full attention. She looked at his paws, which were large and steady on the marble floor. She looked at his chest, rising and falling in slow, even rhythms. She looked finally at his eyes. Rex looked back at her. Between them something moved. Not physically, nothing in the room moved in fact, which was part of what made it so remarkable, but in the quality of the air between them. A communication happening in a register that neither courtroom procedure nor legal training nor any professional credential in that room had prepared anyone to process or document. It was older than any of that. It was the kind of exchange that happens between creatures who are operating from something deeper than learned behavior. Lily processed whatever she received from those amber eyes. She considered it. And then, with the gravity of a small person who understands that some questions deserve to be asked properly, she cleared her throat, an almost imperceptibly tiny sound that nonetheless carried in the absolute silence of that room perfectly clearly, and spoke. "Are you a good boy?" 4 words, 11 syllables, delivered in the clear, earnest treble of a 3-year-old who meant every single one of them with her entire heart. The effect on the room was immediate and total. It was as if someone had pressed a pause button on every automatic process, breathing, blinking, the unconscious shifts of weight that people make when they're standing still, the small fidgets and adjustments that fill the background of any gathered group. Every person in the Maplewood County Courthouse courtroom froze in whatever position they happened to be in at that exact moment and stayed there. Howard the bailiff, standing near the side door with his arms crossed in the posture he had maintained for 19 years of courthouse duty, felt something move in his chest that he would later describe to his wife as like a fist unclenching. He was a man who had served 2 tours in the United States Army, who had been present at scenes of genuine human tragedy in his years of law enforcement work, who prided himself with quiet but absolute conviction on his emotional steadiness. He felt his throat tighten. Ms. Delaney, Catherine Delaney, J.D., 14 years in family law, billing rate of $400 an hour, reputation for being the most composed attorney in Maplewood County under any circumstances whatsoever, turned her head very slightly toward the ceiling and blinked several times with the focused deliberateness of someone manually overriding an involuntary physical response. She would never discuss this moment with any of her colleagues. She thought about it privately for months. The court stenographer, a quiet woman named Patricia who had been transcribing legal proceedings for 16 years and had developed the professional ability to record words while remaining emotionally absent from their meaning, stopped typing. Her fingers rested on the keys. She did not transcribe Lily's question. It felt wrong somehow, like trying to catch something beautiful in a net. She just listened. Claire Harmon, 6 feet behind her daughter with her legal folder pressed against her chest and her heart somewhere in the vicinity of her throat, recognized the question the moment it left Lily's mouth. She recognized it the way you recognize a piece of music you haven't heard in years, not just the notes, but everything the notes carry with them. The room where you first heard it, the person who played it, the version of yourself who was alive then. She pressed her free hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled immediately, completely, without any gradual buildup, as if her body had been waiting for exactly this trigger and responded the instant it arrived. Lily waited. She was patient about it, the patience of a child who has asked a genuine question and is genuinely waiting for a genuine answer. She had been told, in the warm, certain voice she kept in the deepest part of her memory, that these dogs were good, that they helped people, that they deserved to be asked. She had asked. Now she waited to find out if the information she had been given was accurate. Rex did not move. For 3 full seconds, which in that silence felt considerably longer, he simply held her gaze. His ears remained forward. His breathing remained steady. He was, to all external observation, exactly the same as he had been 10 seconds ago. And then Lily, who was not a child who gave up easily on a question she considered important, leaned forward slightly. Her stuffed rabbit dangled from her left hand, Mr. Flops's worn gray ear swinging gently with the movement. She angled her chin down just a fraction, as if she was making sure Rex could hear her clearly, and delivered her follow-up question with a sincerity so complete it bordered on the sacred. "Do you help people?" The second question hit the room differently than the first. The first had been surprising, the shock of a child's voice in a moment of adult tension, the sweetness of the words, the guileless directness of the ask. But the second question was something else, because it wasn't really about Rex, and somewhere in the deepest available part of themselves, every person in that courtroom understood that. It was about her father. It was about whether the things he had told her were true. It was about whether the world was the way he had described it. whether the helpers he had promised existed, whether good was real, whether the information a father plants in his daughter in the brief, irreplaceable time he has with her actually holds up when she carries it out into the world and tests it against reality. Lily was 3 years old. She was also asking the most serious question in the room. And the most decorated K-9 officer in Maplewood County, a dog who had never in 4 years of active service offered an unprompted response to a civilian, drew a slow breath through his extraordinary nose, took in everything she was carrying, every molecule of grief and love and trust, and the specific, irreplaceable scent of a child who had been sent here by someone who was gone, and began, very slowly, to answer. There is a language that exists beneath all other languages. It predates words, predates grammar, predates every system human beings have ever constructed to communicate meaning to one another. It lives in the body, in posture and breath and the angle of a head, and the particular quality of stillness that a creature holds when it has made a decision and is carrying it out with complete intention. Animals speak it fluently. Children, who have not yet been fully educated out of their instincts, still understand significant portions of it. Most adults have lost the ability to speak it themselves, but retain, somewhere beneath their sophistication, the ability to recognize it when they see it. Every person in Courtroom B of the Maplewood County Courthouse was about to receive a master class. Prout saw it begin before anyone else did. That was the particular privilege and burden of 4 years of close partnership with Rex. He had learned to read the dog the way a musician learns to read a score, not just the obvious notations but the subtle markings, the dynamics, the instructions written between the lines that determine how the whole thing actually sounded. He knew Rex's alert posture and his at-ease posture and the 17 gradations between them. He knew the specific angle of ear that meant Rex had detected something interesting, and the different angle that meant Rex had detected something important. He knew the quality of stillness that preceded action, and the different quality of stillness that was itself the action. What he saw now was something he had no existing category for. It started in Rex's shoulders. A release, microscopic, almost imperceptible, but Prout caught it like the letting out of a breath that had been held for a very long time. The dense, coiled readiness that lived permanently in Rex's musculature, the professional tension of a working dog who is always prepared to respond to whatever comes next, began to soften. Not collapse. Rex did not collapse into anything. It was more deliberate than that, more chosen. It was the physical equivalent of a decision being made and enacted simultaneously, each muscle releasing in sequence like a series of knots being untied by careful, unhurried hands. Then his head began to move. Slowly. That was the word everyone would use afterward, independently, without having coordinated their descriptions slowly, with a quality of intention that made it impossible to interpret as anything other than a conscious act. Rex lowered his large, square head by degrees, holding the movement at each stage as if measuring it, as if making sure it was exactly right, as if this was something that deserved to be done correctly. His chin descended toward the marble floor in a long, gradual arc. His neck extended. His broad chest followed, dropping toward the ground as his forelegs slid forward in a movement so controlled and smooth it looked almost choreographed. And then his chin touched the marble floor, directly in front of Lily's small feet, close enough that she could have reached down and touched it without taking a single step forward. Rex lay before her, not collapsed, not sprawled, but laid down with the specific intentionality of an act of deference. His legs extended in front of him, his body level and still, his chin pressed flat against the cold stone floor. Every line of him, which had for 4 years communicated capability and alertness and professional authority, now communicated something entirely different. Something that required no training to interpret, no expertise to understand, no knowledge of canine behavior or canine protocol or animal psychology. He was saying, "I see you. You are safe. I am yours." Prout's hand, which had been hovering near the command gesture he had almost delivered 30 seconds ago, dropped slowly to his side. His mouth opened slightly. He closed it. He had no command for this. There was no protocol for this. This was not a trained behavior. He knew every trained behavior Rex possessed, had spent 4 years installing and maintaining and refining them, and this was not one of them. This was Rex operating from something that existed prior to and beneath training. Something that the 14 months of program preparation and the 4 years of partnership had not created, had merely revealed. The tail started slowly, a single sweep right, then left tentative in a way that Rex's tail had never been tentative before, as if even this physical expression was being offered carefully, with awareness of its own significance. As if Rex understood on whatever level a dog understands things, that this moment was not ordinary and deserved to be treated accordingly. Then it found its rhythm. Back and forth, with a growing confidence and warmth that filled the silent courtroom with a sound nobody had anticipated hearing today. A steady, earnest, physical declaration of joy. The tale of a highly decorated law enforcement K9, thumping against his padded mat on the floor of a courthouse with the uncomplicated happiness of a dog who is exactly where he wants to be, doing exactly what he most wants to do, with exactly the right person. The sound traveled. It was a small sound, objectively, the soft percussion of a dog's tail against fabric, but in that silence it was enormous. It was the loudest thing in the room. It filled every corner, reached every person, landed differently in each of them according to whatever they had carried through those oak doors that morning and were carrying still. Howard the bailiff, who had been standing near the side door with his arms crossed and his face carefully arranged in the expression of professional neutrality he had spent 19 years perfecting, felt that expression begin to fail him. It happened in stages, the way structural failures always happen: first a hairline crack, invisible to outside observers, then a spreading, then a moment where the whole thing simply could not hold anymore. His throat moved, his jaw tightened. He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform jacket and produced a folded white handkerchief, the same one he carried every day, pressed and crisp, that he had never once used in 19 years of courthouse duty, and applied it to the corners of his eyes with the brisk efficiency of a man pretending this was a practical measure against an environmental irritant, rather than what it actually was. Ms. Catherine Delaney, 14 years in family law, had turned her face toward the ceiling 30 seconds ago and had not brought it back down. She was studying the plaster with an intensity that suggested she was looking for something specific, a structural flaw, perhaps, or a pattern in the texture, and finding instead only the fact that something was happening in her chest that she had not consented to and could not immediately control. She was a woman who had built her professional reputation on the absolute reliability of her composure. She had delivered devastating verdicts and absorbing cross-examinations and arguments that dismantled opposing cases with the clean efficiency of surgical instruments. She had done all of this without once losing her composure in a courtroom. She was losing it now quietly over a dog's tail. The court stenographer, Patricia, had not resumed typing. Her fingers remained resting on the keys, not pressing them. She was watching Rex's tail. She was thinking about her own dog, a beagle named Waffles who had died the previous autumn at the age of 12, and the particular quality of happiness that Waffles had expressed with his whole body whenever Patricia came home. The way joy in a dog is never partial, never qualified, never reserved. She was thinking about how she had not let herself cry properly when Waffles died, because there had always been something else demanding her attention. She cried now, briefly and silently, for Waffles, and for this moment, and for reasons she couldn't entirely separate or name. Lily received all of this with great satisfaction. She looked at Rex lying before her, his chin on the floor, his tail moving, his amber eyes warm and steady, and looking directly at her with an expression that contained no ambiguity whatsoever, and she processed what she was seeing with the same careful, thorough attention she had given to the original question. She was checking the answer against the information she had been given. She was verifying. It matched exactly. She stepped forward, one step then another, closing the remaining distance between herself and Rex with the calm certainty of someone completing a journey they set out on long ago. She stopped when she was close enough, looked down at his broad, warm head for one more moment, measuring, confirming, and then extended her small hand. She placed it on top of his head with a gentleness that seemed to belong to someone much older. Not the excited patting of a child encountering a novel animal, but something more deliberate, more knowing. Her small palm rested flat against the warmth of his fur, and she held it there for a moment before patting him twice, carefully, with great respect. Then she leaned down, close enough that her hair brushed the air near his ear, close enough that what she said next was not entirely for the courtroom, was not for the attorneys or the judge or the bailiff with his handkerchief or the stenographer thinking about waffles. It was for Rex, and perhaps for someone else, someone who wasn't in the room in any way that could be documented or verified, but whose presence in that moment every single person there somehow felt. "Good boy," she whispered. 2 words, the simplest possible answer to the simplest possible question, delivered by a 3-year-old to a police dog in the middle of a courthouse on a Tuesday morning in Ohio. The room came undone completely, and beautifully, and all at once. Every person walking through a courthouse door is carrying something invisible. The attorneys carry their strategies and their anxieties and the weight of other people's outcomes resting on the quality of their arguments. The judges carry their histories, every case they have ever decided, every face they have ever watched receive a verdict, every moment where the law and justice aligned perfectly, and every harder moment where they didn't. The clerks and bailiffs carry the particular fatigue of people who witness human crisis every single day and have learned, out of pure self-preservation, to maintain a careful emotional distance from it. And the ordinary people, the ones who didn't choose to be here, who received a court date in the mail and rearranged their lives around it, they carry everything else. The fear, the hope, the grief, the history that brought them to this building in the first place. Claire Harmon had been carrying more than most. What the courtroom saw when they looked at her was a composed young woman in a blue blazer with tired eyes and a legal folder, and a daughter in a yellow dress. What they didn't see, what nobody in that room could have seen, because Claire had become expert at keeping it contained, was the full weight of the 18 months that had brought her to this particular Tuesday morning. The 18 months that had started with a Saturday and a kitchen and a man making pancakes and ended here, in this marble building, fighting for the right to keep her own child. James Harmon had been, by every measure that Claire knew how to apply, an extraordinary human being. Not in the dramatic, headline-generating way, not a war hero or a famous athlete or a man whose name appeared in history books. In the quieter, more durable way that doesn't get documented because it happens in the daily fabric of an ordinary life, and is therefore invisible to everyone except the people whose lives are woven into it. He had been a firefighter for 9 years with Station 7 in Maplewood. He had been a volunteer search and rescue coordinator for 6 of those years, spending his off days and weekends training and deploying with a regional team that covered 4 counties. He had been a man who remembered the names of every person he met, who fixed his neighbors' cars for free on Saturday mornings, who had strong opinions about the correct way to make coffee and the incorrect way to fold a fitted sheet, who sang slightly off-key to whatever was playing in the kitchen and never seemed to notice or care. He had been a man who loved his wife with a steadiness that never required grand gestures because it was present in every small one, the cup of tea that appeared on her desk when she was working late, the way he always reached for her hand first when they were walking anywhere, the specific look he gave her across rooms full of other people that said, without any ambiguity, "You are the person I am always looking for in every room." He had been 34 years old. He had been making blueberry pancakes, Lily's favorite, on a Saturday morning in October when his heart, without warning or precedent or any prior indication that anything was wrong, simply stopped. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. 6 minutes was not enough. Claire had stood in her kitchen holding Lily against her shoulder, her daughter's face pressed into her neck, watching people she didn't know work on the person she knew better than herself. And then there was a moment, a specific, terrible, absolutely certain moment, when she understood that James was not coming back from this, that the kitchen would always smell like blueberries now, that Lily would grow up without her father, that every version of the future Claire had imagined was gone, replaced by something uncharted and terrifying and hers alone to navigate. She had navigated it. She had gotten up every morning. She had fed Lily and dressed Lily and taken Lily to the park and read Lily her bedtime stories and answered Lily's questions about where Daddy went with the careful, gentle honesty that the child psychologist had recommended. She had gone back to work 6 weeks after the funeral because the mortgage required it. She had held herself together with the grim, determined efficiency of someone who doesn't have the option of falling apart, because there is a small person depending on them to remain functional. And then, 8 weeks after James died, his parents had filed for partial custody of Lily. Richard and Susan Harmon were not cruel people. Claire had known them for 7 years and understood them well enough to know that what drove the filing was not malice but grief. The specific, desperate grief of parents who had lost their only child and were terrified of losing access to the last living piece of him. They wanted Lily. They wanted her in the consuming, urgent way that loss makes people want things, not rationally, not with full consideration of what was fair or appropriate or in Lily's best interest, but with the raw animal urgency of people who are drowning and reaching for whatever they can hold. Claire understood this. She even felt compassion for it in her better moments. But understanding the source of something doesn't make it less damaging when it lands on you. The legal battle had stretched across 14 months and 3 different attorneys, and a financial cost that had required Claire to drain the savings account she and James had spent 4 years building together. It had required her to spend hours in rooms like this one, translating the most intimate details of her life and her parenting and her grief into the formal, bloodless language of legal proceedings. It had required her to sit across tables from people who were arguing, with professional detachment, that she was insufficient, that the life she was providing for her daughter was somehow incomplete, somehow lacking, somehow in need of supplementation by people who had decided, 14 months ago, that her judgment about her own child's welfare could not be trusted. It had been in ways she had not told anyone fully, not her attorney, not her friends, not the grief counselor she had seen for 3 months before the cost became prohibitive, absolutely devastating. She had walked into the courthouse that Tuesday morning running on 4 hours of sleep, and the specific, brittle determination of someone who has been strong for so long that strength has stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like the only available mode of existence. She had gone through the security scanner. She had nodded at the guard who recognized her. She had found their courtroom, found their bench, sat down with Lily beside her and her folder on her lap and her heart somewhere between her throat and her stomach, doing the thing she always did in these moments, the internal arithmetic of reassurance, adding up every reason to believe today would be the day it finally ended in her favor. She had been so focused on her own internal calculations that she hadn't noticed, at first, when Lily's hand slipped out of hers. When she looked down and found it empty, her first response was the automatic, reflexive alarm of a parent who has lost physical contact with their child in a public space. Her eyes found Lily immediately, 3 feet away, then 6, then 10, moving across the courtroom floor with that particular walk that Claire had been watching for 3 years and never stopped finding both terrifying and magnificent. The walk that said the world was interesting and available and worth moving toward without hesitation. And then Claire saw where Lily was going, and something happened in her chest that was different from alarm. Because she recognized it. Not the dog specifically, she had not noticed Rex when they came in, had been too focused on locating their attorney and finding their seats. But the type, the vest, the badge, the broad, steady, working dog posture that James had shown her in photographs and described in stories and spoken about with the particular reverence he reserved for things he considered genuinely worthy of respect. She knew in the instantaneous, wordless way that grief sometimes delivers its most significant moments, exactly what was about to happen. Not the specifics, not the lowered head or the wagging tail or the 2 whispered words that would reduce an entire courtroom to tears, but the shape of it, the meaning of it. The fact that her daughter was walking toward that dog with James's confidence and James's certainty and James's absolute, unshakable trust in the goodness of working animals, carrying every conversation James had ever had with her about dogs like Rex in her small body like a letter he had written, and she was only now delivering. Claire pressed her hand over her mouth. The tears came not gradually but all at once, the way they come when something has been held back for a very long time and finally finds the precise crack it needs to get through. She stood in the middle of the courtroom and let them fall, and she did not try to stop them, and she did not look away from her daughter, and she felt for the first time in 18 months of fighting and grieving, and holding herself together with sheer force of will, she felt James. Not as an absence, not as a loss, but as a presence, moving through their daughter like light through a window, warm and specific and absolutely real. He had prepared her. In the time he had, the brief, ordinary, irreplaceable time he had been given, he had told his daughter the right things. He had sent her into the world with the right information. And Lily, who was 3 years old and remembered almost nothing of her father's face, carried him anyway, in her walk, in her certainty, in the question she asked without a moment of hesitation to a police dog on a courthouse floor. "Are you a good boy? Do you help people?" James Harmon had taught his daughter to ask that question. And standing in the middle of a courtroom full of strangers, watching Rex answer it, Claire understood something that no legal proceeding and no custody argument and no attorney on either side had ever been able to touch. James was still here. He was here in the most important way, in the person his daughter was becoming. And no court in the world had any jurisdiction over Tha. Every eye in the courtroom was on the little girl, Lily, as she took her first fearless steps toward Rex, the police dog. But Claire Harmon's gaze was fixed on her daughter in a different way, seeing not a tiny, golden-haired child, but a living conduit of James, carrying his steadiness, his love, his quiet bravery into a room that had seemed impossibly cold and calculated. Claire's chest tightened, her legal folder pressing into her palm like a lifeline she didn't need right now. She could barely breathe as she watched Rex tilt his head, attentive, ears twitching, tail bristling slightly with instinctive curiosity. And then, and this was the part she would never forget, the dog leaned forward just a fraction, a small acknowledgement, as if he recognized something beyond scent or command, something intangible that her daughter carried with her. Trust, innocence, the unshakable certainty that comes from being loved without question. The court reporter's pen scratched furiously across the pages, attempting to capture the procedural details, but all the procedural detail in the world could not capture this moment. It was raw, it was alive, it was a meeting of two beings who understood courage differently. One trained in the precision of law enforcement, the other in the instinctive knowledge of her father's lessons. Then, without warning, Rex's demeanor shifted. The soft, measured attentiveness turned into rigid alertness. His eyes scanned the back of the room, the muscles in his shoulders tightening. The entire courtroom felt the tension rise, though no one except Claire, and perhaps Lily, knew why. The doors at the far end of the courtroom creaked slightly, a sound swallowed by the quiet murmurs of the spectators, but Rex reacted immediately, growling low in his throat, a sound that sent a shiver through everyone who heard it. The girl froze, a finger raised instinctively as she studied the dog's reaction. Claire felt a shiver of premonition run down her spine, a physical echo of the grief and fear that had carried her through the last 18 months. A man stepped through the door, hesitant, his presence commanding a curious, uneasy energy. He wasn't large, but his movements were nervous, eyes flicking around the room, settling for a brief moment on Rex. The dog's growl sharpened, low and warning. The man's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his coat. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, curious whispers racing like wildfire, but no one dared move, and no one could predict what was about to happen. Claire felt Lily's small hand squeeze hers. Her daughter's question, the one she had asked Rex, hung in the air like an incantation. "Do you help people?" The innocence in that voice contrasted violently with the growing tension at the rear of the room. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to look at Rex to know he sensed danger, because instinctually, dogs like him always did. The man pulled something from his pocket, a small, crumpled envelope, almost too small to hold the significance it carried. He extended it slowly, almost as if he understood that one wrong move could escalate the situation beyond repair. Detective Matthews, seated a few rows back, froze mid-note, recognizing immediately the potential weight of that envelope. He had been part of the investigation, had handled classified materials before, and yet something in the way the man held it, almost pleadingly, almost reverently, made his instincts scream. Officer Ramirez's hand hovered over Rex's harness. "Stay calm," he whispered, but his eyes betrayed the tension, the unspoken question of how to handle the convergence of a toddler, a police dog, and a man who clearly knew he was being scrutinized. Claire's heart raced as her daughter took another small step forward, curiosity and courage overriding any instinct to retreat. She whispered softly, "Lily, stop." But the words barely reached past her lips. It was too late. Lily's innocence had created a bridge between her and Rex that no adult command could break. Rex barked sharply, the sound loud and commanding, yet controlled, a warning, a declaration. The man froze entirely, eyes wide, gaze flicking between the little girl and the dog. He wasn't expecting this. No one had anticipated that a 3-year-old could wield such influence, that her presence alone could dictate the movements of a trained K9. Then came the whisper, almost imperceptible, from Lily, "Are you a good boy?" It was not just a question. It was a challenge. And in that moment every observer felt it, the collision of the ordinary and the extraordinary, of grief and bravery, of loss and instinct. Rex's tail lowered slightly, his posture easing just a fraction, yet the intensity of his gaze never wavered. He recognized not the man but the truth the girl carried, a truth that was undeniable, pure and simple. Intentions could not be hidden here. The man's hand wavered over the envelope again, as if weighing the decision that could alter everything in that room. Claire could see the calculation in his eyes, the history of desperate choices, the unspoken acknowledgement that what he carried was powerful, and that the child before him, this tiny conduit of memory and trust, was holding more authority than anyone in the courtroom had anticipated. Then, as if compelled by forces no one could articulate, Lily knelt slightly, reaching out toward the envelope. The man stepped back reflexively, and in that instant the contents of the envelope became visible to a single pair of eyes, Detective Matthews. The photographs, the documents, the evidence, items that should have remained hidden, that could implicate powerful figures, reveal corruption, or destroy a life, were in the open, fragile in the hands of fate. Officer Ramirez moved a fraction closer to Rex, ready to intervene, but hesitated, sensing that the dog would act if necessary, that he was not just a protector, but a judge in his own right, capable of discerning threat with a precision unmatched by human intuition. Claire's heart pounded, adrenaline mingling with the deep well of grief that had carried her through the past year and a half. Every instinct told her to reach for Lily, to shield her from this potential danger, but something in the way Rex and her daughter interacted, something inherited from James, held her in place. It was trust, fragile, terrifying, and utterly unshakable. The courtroom held its collective breath. Reporters' cameras clicked quietly, the murmurs slowing to a stunned silence. No one spoke. Even the judge, whose gavel could usually command absolute attention, seemed suspended in time, eyes fixed on the extraordinary tableau unfolding before him. And then the man made his choice. He shifted his weight, hand trembling, and took a single, deliberate step backward, away from Lily and Rex. The envelope dropped from his hand, fluttering to the floor like a leaf in autumn. Rex barked again, sharper this time, the sound reverberating against the marble walls, signaling the transition from caution to control. The dog's posture was a warning to the man and a shield for the child, an unmistakable message that the game had changed. Claire exhaled, a shuddering, silent release, but the tension didn't leave the room. The envelope lay on the polished floor, fragile and commanding attention, and all at once, every person in that courtroom realized. The next moment would define everything. Because Lily, tiny, fearless, and carrying her father's legacy in her small frame, had already made her choice. And the man's reaction, the dog's response, and the envelope itself were about to ignite a chain of events no one, not the judge, not the lawyers, not even the officers, could have predicted. The air seemed to vibrate with anticipation, charged with the electric knowledge that the ordinary, the extraordinary, and the unseen past were colliding. Claire's eyes locked on Rex, and then on Lily, and a single thought anchored her amidst the chaos. Whatever happened next, the story was no longer hers alone. And then the man moved again. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. Every second was a heartbeat, and every heartbeat carried the weight of 18 months of grief, hope, and quiet determination. The man who had dropped the envelope froze for a split second, his eyes darting from Lily to Rex, calculating, panic rising like a tide he couldn't control. Then, like a whisper turning into a shout, he bolted. His polished shoes scraped against the marble floor, echoing in the cavernous room, startling bailiffs and spectators alike. Chairs tipped over. A reporter's camera clattered to the ground. Gasps and cries erupted, but the world seemed to narrow for Claire Harmon to a single, terrifying point. Her daughter was in the middle of the room, moving toward a man who clearly had no intention of behaving rationally. Rex reacted immediately. The dog's powerful body tensed, muscles coiling like springs. Officer Ramirez reached for his harness, shouting commands, but it was already too late. Rex had made his decision. With a fluid, almost balletic precision, the Belgian Malinois lunged forward, moving with a force that was both controlled and unstoppable. Lily, unfazed, took a few quick steps forward, her little hands steady, her gaze locked on Rex. She repeated almost instinctively the words James had taught her, "Doggy, help people." The dog obeyed not just because of command, but because of trust imbued by a father's love and carried through the child's voice. In that instant, the courtroom was no longer a place of law and procedure. It was a stage for something primal and true, instinct, courage, and connection. The man tripped on the edge of the witness stand, a stumble that might have been his escape or his downfall. Rex seized the opportunity, intercepting him with a controlled authority that left no room for resistance. His jaws remained safely closed, his body a shield, forcing the man backward, toward the officers who were now scrambling to regain control. The crowd's collective breath caught in their throats. Some were on their feet, some sat frozen, eyes wide, mouths open. No one had ever seen anything like this. A toddler guiding a police dog with the confidence and certainty of someone twice her age. Every movement Lily made seemed to communicate strategy, every tiny gesture carrying weight, every expression conveying command. Claire felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time they were mingled with awe and pride. She had known her daughter was extraordinary in small ways, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. She watched Lily pivot slightly, pointing toward the door. "Doggy, stop him there." Rex adjusted instantly, pivoting on powerful haunches, herding the man into a corner. He barked, low and threatening, not to injure but to dominate, to assert control, to declare the outcome. The man's desperation was palpable. He threw his hands up, finally acknowledging that his strength, his plans, his secrets, all of it, was no match for the combined instinct and courage of a child and a police dog. Officer Ramirez moved in quickly, securing the man in handcuffs while Detective Matthews bent down to retrieve the envelope, now safe but fluttering in disarray on the floor. Every person in the courtroom seemed to release the collective tension they hadn't realized they were holding. Gasps turned into murmurs of relief. Applause was stifled but inevitable. Lily stepped toward Rex, her small hands resting on his harness. "Good boy," she whispered, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. The dog's tail wagged slowly, a subtle acknowledgement of praise, of a job done, of a bond that transcended words. Claire crossed the floor in a few quick strides, gathering her daughter into her arms. You were amazing," she whispered into Lily's hair, holding her tightly. Her voice trembled, a mix of exhaustion, relief, and awe. "Just amazing." The judge, still seated at the bench, adjusted his robe, his expression unreadable but his eyes betraying shock. I don't think I've ever witnessed anything like this," he muttered, almost to himself. The courtroom clerks shook their head, the bailiff's jaw was tight, and reporters were scribbling furiously, capturing every word, every action, knowing that this story would not just make the news, it would dominate it. Detective Matthews leaned toward Officer Ramirez, whispering, Did that just happen? A 3-year-old directed a police dog." Ramirez didn't answer immediately. He simply shook his head, eyes still on Lily and Rex, who were now quietly standing together, the girl's small hand resting against the dog's massive shoulder. I don't know, but I've been in law enforcement for 15 years, he said slowly, and I've never seen anything like that." The man, now seated and subdued, looked at Lily as if trying to comprehend how someone so small had managed to control a creature trained for power, aggression, and obedience. His expression was a mix of fear, disbelief, and oddly recognition, as if he understood that he had been judged, not by law or court, but by the pure, unfiltered courage of innocence. Claire took a deep breath, feeling the weight of months, of grief, of legal battles, of sleepless nights, of holding herself together solely for the sake of her daughter, finally beginning to lift. And yet, even in that moment of triumph, a thought flickered in the back of her mind, a shadow of caution. Because the envelope. The documents and photographs it contained weren't just evidence. They were explosive, dangerous, and while the immediate threat had been neutralized, the chain reaction they could set off outside the courtroom had only just begun. She looked at Detective Matthews, then at Officer Ramirez, then at her daughter. "We need to be careful," she whispered, the words barely audible. "This isn't over, not really." Lily, sensing the tension in her mother's voice, but interpreting it through the lens of her father's lessons, squeezed Rex's harness and whispered, "Doggy, stay with me." Rex's eyes met hers, steady, unwavering. The bond between them, between child and dog, between grief and courage, between past and present, was unbreakable. And in that instant, Claire realized something profound. The fight to protect her daughter had taken a form she could never have imagined. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the courtroom, the man who had tried to run, the envelope, the secrets it contained, all of it, lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. The audience might have thought the chaos was over. They might have believed the story had reached its conclusion. But Claire knew better. Because the envelope had been dropped, and when it opened, what it revealed would change everything. The courtroom held its breath again, the calm before a storm that no one saw coming. The courtroom seemed suspended in time. Every eye was on the envelope lying on the polished floor, its contents a fragile line between truth and chaos. Detective Matthews knelt slowly, carefully opening it, revealing photographs, documents, and notes that had been hidden for months, evidence of misconduct in a nearby precinct, unreported incidents, and a tangled web of corruption that the man who had tried to flee had been carrying. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the weight of what they were seeing began to sink in. Lawyers murmured urgently to one another, the judge leaned forward, and even the journalists held their breath, sensing that this was no ordinary custody hearing. The stakes had suddenly exploded far beyond the personal fight over a child. Rex stood alert beside Lily, body taut, tail flicking slightly. The little girl, golden curls bouncing as she looked up at the dog, whispered in her small, steady voice, "Doggy, protect me." And protect her he did. The dog's presence was commanding, a living shield between Lily and the chaos that now threatened to erupt. Officer Ramirez moved closer, but hesitated, knowing that Rex would not allow anyone to come between him and his charge. The man who had tried to escape sat on the floor, hands cuffed, eyes wide, the full realization of what he had carried and what he had almost lost dawning on him. His gaze met Lily's for a brief moment, and in it a silent acknowledgement passed. She had stopped him, guided the dog, and claimed control in a way no one else could. Claire stepped forward, pulling Lily close. Her heart swelled, and for the first time in 18 months she allowed herself to feel relief, pride, and the deep, unshakable connection to her daughter and to James's memory. Every trial, every sleepless night, every tear shed in private had led to this moment, a moment where courage, innocence, and love intersected to create something extraordinary. The judge cleared his throat, voice steady but layered with awe. This is highly irregular," he said. "But given the circumstances, the bravery, the instincts displayed, I think we must proceed with caution, but also with recognition of what just occurred." Claire's attorney moved quickly, ensuring that Lily was shielded from the scrutiny of the adults, while Detective Matthews and Officer Ramirez secured the evidence and the man who had tried to flee. The courtroom, which had been tense and anxious just moments before, now buzzed with whispers of astonishment, of disbelief, and of admiration for a 3-year-old who had, in her tiny hands, altered the course of a day no one would forget. Lily tugged at Rex's harness, smiling. "Good boy," she said again, her voice full of the kind of simple, absolute trust that only children can possess. The dog responded with a soft wag of his tail, eyes gentle, aware, protective, an unspoken acknowledgement that they were a team, bound by loyalty and courage beyond words. Claire hugged her daughter tightly, whispering in her ear, "You were amazing, Lily, just like your father would have been." Her voice cracked, but the emotion was not just grief, it was pride, joy, and a deep, abiding love. "James would be so proud of you." And in that moment, surrounded by marble walls and a courtroom full of strangers, Claire felt something she hadn't in months. The presence of James, steady and unwavering in the small hands of his daughter, in the trust of a dog, in the undeniable proof that love, courage, and family could survive even the most impossible of trials. The man who had tried to escape now faced the full consequences of his actions, but the focus was no longer solely on him. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary: a child's courage, a dog's loyalty, a mother's perseverance, and it would be remembered far beyond the legal records. As the room slowly settled, cameras capturing every expression, Claire whispered to Lily, "We did it. We're safe." Lily smiled up at her mother, then at Rex, then glanced toward the doors of the courtroom. "Daddy helped me," she said softly. And Claire, feeling the warm echo of James's love in that simple, profound statement, realized something. He had never left them. Not really. Every step Lily had taken, every decision she had made, every brave choice that guided Rex's instincts had been touched by the father she loved and lost. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause, not for the drama or the scandal, but for the undeniable display of courage and humanity. The story would go viral. Headlines would tell of a toddler commanding a police dog, of a custody battle transformed into an unforgettable moment of heroism. But for Claire, Lily, and even Rex, it wasn't about fame. It was about family, memory, and the extraordinary ways love endures. And somewhere in the spaces between grief and triumph, Claire knew that this was just the beginning. Not of trouble, not of challenges, but of understanding the depth of courage a child could carry, the strength of love that never truly dies, and the unbreakable bonds that connect a family, even across the divide of life and death. As the gavel banged lightly, signaling the end of the session, Lily rested her head against her mother's shoulder. Rex nuzzled her gently, his warm body a steady presence. And in that quiet, suspended moment, Claire whispered to both of them, "We're going to be okay." James made sure of that. Outside, the world waited. But inside, in that courtroom, the impossible had happened. A 3-year-old had spoken to a police dog. A dog had responded. And a family had discovered that courage, love, and memory could overcome even the most impossible obstacles. The story would be told again and again, but for Claire and Lily, the truth was simple. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest power. And as the courtroom doors closed behind them, Claire couldn't help but glance at Rex, then at Lily, and smile. The unexpected heroes of the day had not only saved themselves, but had reminded everyone present of something extraordinary, that love, bravery, and trust can appear in the most unlikely forms. And in the quiet aftermath, with sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows, Claire finally felt it: peace.